The administration, and we believe driven largely by Elon Musk's priorities, really took a sledgehammer to the work we're doing.
We have a judge from a very liberal state who ruled like that. So bad for our country.
At first glance, it looked like just another trending topic on social media. But behind the hashtag, the screenshots, and the growing buzz online, something deeper had started to unravel. What began as a few users sharing public records and asking questions turned into what would soon become a full-blown national conversation about money, power, and accountability in public office. The focus of the discussion was Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, a relatively new figure in national politics. Known for her outspoken presence and passionate speeches, Crockett had made a name for herself with bold claims against corporate money in politics and a loud opposition to billionaire influence. But ironically, what put her at the center of controversy was not what she said, but what people started to discover about her financial footprint. It started with property records. A series of viral posts on the platform X, formerly known as Twitter, began connecting the dots between Crockett's public salary and her reported real estate purchases. According to publicly available filings, she had acquired 3 high-value properties in just under 2 years, including a $5 million mansion in Texas Hill Country, a $2.5 million lake house, and a $1.5 million townhouse in a gated community. All of them appeared to be bought outright, without any record of traditional mortgages. This raised an obvious question. How does a public servant earning $174,000 per year afford nearly $10 million in real estate? The post didn't stop there. Users dug into her travel history, financial disclosures, and campaign filings. Reports surfaced of multiple international trips, including stops in Qatar, India, and the United Arab Emirates, some of which had unreported expenses or vague justifications tied to NGOs or foreign cultural exchange programs. While foreign travel isn't unusual for elected officials, what caught people's attention was the apparent absence of detailed disclosures and the timing of those trips in relation to committee work and policy decisions. The story really picked up traction when entrepreneur and ex-CEO Elon Musk responded publicly. Known for being highly active on the platform and unafraid to weigh in on political and social topics, Musk posted a message directly addressing Crockett's property purchases. He laid out the basic figures, her salary, the properties, and the timeline, and simply asked how it was possible. The tweet was brief but powerful. It didn't accuse, it didn't insult. It just asked a question many people were already thinking, and within minutes, it exploded. Social media went into overdrive. Hashtags started trending, journalists began making calls, users posted clips, reaction videos, and commentary. Within an hour, the term #CrockettGate had overtaken trending topics globally. It wasn't just a viral moment. It was the start of a serious conversation about transparency and ethics in government. For many, the heart of the issue wasn't just whether a member of Congress had acquired wealth beyond her official income. It was about how that wealth might have been obtained. Was it legal? Was it ethical? And more importantly, was this an isolated case or part of a broader trend? These questions weren't new. In fact, they've been asked for years in relation to public officials. But what made this case stand out was how quickly the public turned its attention to financial data, disclosures, and timelines. Instead of waiting for traditional media to pick up the story, users on X began building it themselves, one screenshot at a time. As this unfolded online, a relatively unknown agency called DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, reportedly began its own internal review. Created under Section 408 of the Federal Modernization Act, DOGE's mandate is to monitor ethical standards, track financial inconsistencies, and audit public sector spending. It operates quietly, without public statements or media campaigns. But it has the authority to investigate patterns that raise red flags, especially where taxpayer funds or potential conflicts of interest are concerned. According to sources close to the situation, DOGE had already flagged several anomalies linked to Crockett's recent activity. These included unusual patterns in campaign contributions, unexpected asset accumulation, and travel disclosures that didn't align with known itineraries or committee schedules. At this stage, there was still no formal accusation. But it was clear that interest had moved beyond speculation. The data was real, the records were publicly available, and the gap between Crockett's official earnings and her reported lifestyle was growing harder to ignore. Amid the frenzy, independent journalists began releasing their own findings. One Substack post linked the Congresswoman to more than 20 different political action committees PACs, several of which were backed by major corporations, despite her repeated public claims that she had accepted $0 from such sources. Another post traced the timeline of her property acquisitions alongside her congressional milestones, highlighting what some called a financial glow-up that didn't match the usual pace of civil service. It was during this period that the name DOGE started entering public conversation more frequently. At first, many thought it was a joke, a play on Elon Musk's interest in cryptocurrency and memes. But it became clear that DOGE wasn't a meme and it wasn't a tech experiment. It was a government agency with a very serious purpose, and it was already looking into the financial records tied to Crockett's time in office. By the end of the first news cycle, the story had gone beyond partisan politics. It wasn't just a left versus right issue. It had become a case study in accountability, a test of how a democratic system handles uncomfortable questions about its own representatives. People from across the political spectrum began weighing in. Some defended Crockett, arguing that she was being targeted for her views or her race. Others focused on the numbers, pointing out that regardless of identity, the math simply didn't add up. For the average taxpayer, it wasn't about ideology. It was about fairness. If elected officials were using their positions for personal gain, then something had to change. Meanwhile, in the background, DOGE analysts were quietly compiling a case file. They were cross-checking travel logs, comparing campaign finance data, and following paper trails through domestic and international channels. According to those familiar with the process, the case had been classified as an open investigation, flagged under excess asset accumulation incongruent with public salary. Back online, the story kept growing. Memes appeared, commentary videos spread across platforms, and media outlets finally began catching up to the conversation that had started hours earlier on social media. It was clear that the situation had reached a critical point. The questions were out in the open. The numbers were too big to ignore. And the country was watching, not just to see what would happen next, but to see how the system would respond. This wasn't just about one tweet or one politician. It was about the credibility of public office and whether the people trusted to serve the public were playing by the same rules as everyone else. The first chapter of this story ended not with an arrest or an admission, but with silence. The kind of silence that comes when the facts are staring back and the answers are still nowhere to be found. As the story around Jasmine Crockett gained momentum online, it began to take shape in the real world too. What started with a few viral posts and a single tweet from Elon Musk quickly evolved into a nationwide conversation. But it wasn't just about a congresswoman anymore. It was about the growing sense that something didn't feel right in Washington, and that maybe it hadn't for a long time. By this point, the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, had moved past preliminary monitoring and was now actively investigating. Internally, analysts were comparing Crockett's public financial disclosures with property records, campaign contributions, and international travel documents. These weren't assumptions, they were data points. And the more they checked, the more questions emerged. One key detail that triggered further inquiry was the timing. Crockett had been sworn into Congress in July 2022. Just 3 months later, records showed that she closed on a $1.5 million townhouse in a gated community. 6 months after that, she purchased a $2.5 million lake house. Then, by the following June, a $5 million estate appeared in her name. None of the transactions appeared to involve mortgages. All three were listed as cash purchases. Analysts inside DOGE flagged this as statistically improbable. On a federal salary of $174,000, with standard living expenses and tax deductions, the average member of Congress wouldn't be expected to accumulate $9 million in real estate in under a year. Even if Crockett had prior savings or side income, the scale and pace of the acquisitions raised red flags. There was a pattern here, and patterns are what DOGE was built to follow. Meanwhile, Elon Musk was preparing to address the situation publicly. He didn't issue another tweet. He didn't give an interview. Instead, he scheduled a live stream event titled simply, "How Public Service Pays So Well." No one knew exactly what he was planning to reveal, but the title alone was enough to pull in millions of viewers. When the stream began, it didn't open with dramatic music or flashy visuals. It opened with a single slide, a timeline. From Crockett's campaign launch in 2020 to her real estate purchases in 2023, overlaid with dollar signs representing political contributions, NGO travel records, and PAC filings. Musk stood center stage. No tie, no teleprompter, just a clicker in his hand and a digital whiteboard behind him. In his usual calm tone, he walked through the dates, the filings, the travel reports, and the inconsistencies. He didn't shout. He didn't make it personal. He presented it like a math problem, one that didn't add up. He pointed out how Crockett had once tweeted that she had taken $0 from corporate PACs, yet her filings with the Federal Election Commission showed nearly $400,000 from PACs since 2022. He highlighted multiple international trips, including one to Qatar in February 2023 and another to India soon after, both listed as cultural exchanges, both paid for by outside organizations and neither clearly disclosed in her public reports. The stream went viral almost instantly. Viewers didn't just watch, they shared. They clipped moments. They fact-checked in real time. Journalists who had been slow to cover the story earlier now jumped on it. Within the hour, the hashtag #How did she afford it was trending globally. But the real turning point came during a scheduled congressional hearing the following week. What was initially set to be a routine review on ethics and transparency quickly became a national spectacle. Cameras were rolling. Reporters were packed into the back rows. CSPAN was broadcasting live. At the center of it all sat Jasmine Crockett, flanked by staffers and legal counsel. She appeared calm, but determined. When given the floor, she opened with a bold statement. According to Crockett, the hearing was not about efficiency or ethics, it was about Elon Musk. She accused him of using his influence and platform to attack her personally and politically. She held up a printed version of Musk's original tweet and questioned his credibility, his intentions, and his own wealth. Her remarks drew mixed reactions. Some lawmakers nodded in agreement. Others sat back quietly. A few exchanged glances across party lines. But when Musk was given the opportunity to respond, the tone shifted. He stood with no papers and no prepared speech, just memory and certainty. He began by calmly stating that his interest in this case had nothing to do with politics or personal vendettas. It had to do with data. He pointed to the timeline again. 3 property purchases, $9 million in real estate under 1 year on a 6-figure salary. He acknowledged the criticisms aimed at his own wealth and business history, but stated clearly that unlike public office, his income had never come from taxpayers. "You can criticize billionaires all day," he said, "but don't pretend you're fighting for the people while accepting money from the same corporations you claim to stand against." The room grew quiet. He then mentioned the international trips again, paid for by NGOs and foreign entities, and questioned whether these were genuine cultural exchanges or veiled lobbying efforts. "There's a difference between being invited to a panel," he said, "and being flown out business class to attend one by someone who later benefits from your vote." Crockett didn't respond immediately. Her expression was tense, her hands folded on the table. When she did speak, her tone was defensive. She insisted all her travel was cleared and in line with ethics guidelines, and that any donations received were within legal limits. She claimed the attacks were politically motivated and part of a broader campaign to silence progressive voices. The hearing ended without a formal conclusion. But something had shifted. The public had seen the documents, the numbers, and the timelines for themselves. The debate was no longer about political labels. It was about accountability. And for many watching, the question wasn't whether rules were broken, but whether the rules themselves were strong enough to prevent this kind of situation from happening again. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, DOGE continued its investigation. Analysts discovered that several NGOs which had covered travel costs for Crockett also had ties to foreign policy initiatives she later supported. Some were international nonprofits with funding from U.S. agencies. Others were private organizations that frequently hosted conferences attended by members of Congress. What emerged wasn't just a story about one politician. It was a story about a system where funds could move from the US government to overseas NGOs, then back into events, perks, and influence, without ever technically breaking the law. As one analyst put it, this isn't old-school corruption, it's structure. It's how the machine works. Musk echoed this sentiment during a closed-door DOGE session, reportedly stating, "This isn't about suitcases of cash anymore. It's speaking fees, retreats, indirect sponsorships. It's perfectly legal influence peddling, and it's happening in plain sight." The team at DOGE began tracing this pattern not just in Crockett's case, but in others as well. The names hadn't been made public yet, but the wheels were turning. The structure of power, influence, and wealth in Washington was finally being mapped, one layer at a time. As the public waited for DOGE's official findings, the pressure built. Crockett's office issued a brief statement denying any wrongdoing and promising full cooperation. Meanwhile, Elon Musk remained largely silent. He didn't post follow-up tweets, he didn't take interviews, he just let the numbers speak for themselves. By now, it was clear that this was more than just a moment, it was a movement. And no matter what came next, the expectation had been set. Elected officials would be held to account, not by partisan debate, but by facts, records, and transparency. By the time the Department of Government Efficiency stepped forward to present its findings, the story had grown beyond social media threads and trending hashtags. It had crossed over into newsrooms, late-night television, and everyday conversations happening around dinner tables across the country. The phrase, "How did she afford it?" had gone from a tweet to a national talking point. And now, everyone was waiting for answers. At exactly 10 a.m., in a small, unassuming press room inside a federal building in Washington, DOGE's director stepped up to a single microphone. There were no opening remarks, no drawn-out introductions. Just a black folder, a direct stare, and a tone that made it clear this wasn't about political theater. It was about presenting facts. The director opened with a straightforward summary. Between July 2022 and August 2024, Representative Jasmine Crockett had received $372,450 in political contributions that could be directly traced to corporate PACs. This, they noted, contradicted several public statements Crockett had made over the years, including a 2020 tweet where she claimed to have accepted $0 from corporate political action committees. But the numbers didn't stop there. The report also highlighted over $68,000 in international travel expenses that had been covered by third parties, including foreign governments and international non-governmental organizations. These expenses, according to the DOGE spokesperson, were either inaccurately disclosed or not reported at all. Under federal ethics guidelines, such trips, especially when funded by entities with diplomatic or policy interests, must be thoroughly declared. In these cases, they weren't. Reporters in the room tapped furiously on their keyboards. Cameras clicked, microphones picked up every word. And for a few moments, the room was silent. Not because there was nothing to say, but because everyone knew this wasn't just about one individual. It was about a pattern of behavior that many suspected had been happening quietly behind the scenes for a long time. As the director explained, this wasn't about proving criminal activity beyond a shadow of a doubt. The findings weren't a criminal indictment, but they did confirm what many already feared, that the systems meant to track and regulate financial conduct in Congress were being stretched, ignored, or bypassed altogether. And perhaps even more troubling, it was all happening in a way that was technically legal, at least on paper. You don't need to be handed a briefcase full of cash to be compromised, the director said plainly. Sometimes all it takes is a business-class flight and a dinner at a luxury hotel paid for by someone who expects something in return. While the mainstream press rolled out coverage within minutes of the report, one voice remained notably quiet: Jasmine Crockett's. Her office issued a brief statement. The Congresswoman stands by her record and will not be commenting at this time. That silence, however, only added fuel to the fire. Outside the DOGE building, dozens of reporters waited to speak to Elon Musk, who had attended the briefing but stayed quiet throughout. When he finally stepped up to the row of cameras, he didn't issue a dramatic monologue or claim credit for anything. He simply laid out a few truths that were already circulating in the public domain. If a member of Congress makes under $200,000 a year but somehow ends up with millions in assets within a few short years, we're not talking about budgeting, he said calmly. We're talking about laundering, political, not financial. He didn't single out any party or ideology. In fact, he made it a point to say he didn't care about political affiliation at all. I don't care if you're red, blue, green, or independent, he added. If you're using public service to enrich yourself privately, you're next. That moment hit harder than any tweet ever could. Back inside DOGE headquarters, analysts continued combing through financial flows. They were now tracking similar behavior among other elected officials, cross-referencing foreign aid packages with NGO grant trails and real estate acquisitions. What they were uncovering wasn't just about one congresswoman. It was about an ecosystem, an infrastructure of influence that allowed money to travel vast distances, change hands multiple times, and return to Washington in ways that were hard to detect and even harder to regulate. A senior analyst who previously audited international banking systems described it as the most elegant laundering system I've ever seen, because it doesn't look like laundering at all. One path in particular stood out. It started with U.S. foreign aid appropriated for development projects overseas. That money would be distributed to international NGOs operating in developing countries. From there, the funds would move to local partner organizations, event hosts, or logistical subcontractors, and somewhere along that route, a portion of the money would be used to sponsor high-end conferences, travel stipends, and networking events attended by U.S. politicians. It wasn't a bribe. It wasn't an envelope stuffed with cash. It was a plane ticket, a hotel room, a speaking engagement. It was completely normalized, and that's what made it so effective. In the days following the DOGE report, Congress began to feel the pressure. Ethics committees scheduled emergency meetings. Political talk shows devoted entire episodes to transparency in office. Even late-night hosts, usually focused on pop culture, began cracking jokes about real estate portfolios and business-class flights to Doha. Meanwhile, Crockett was summoned to a closed-door review session at DOGE's secure facility. The meeting was quiet, without media or public access. Elon Musk was present, along with the agency's director and a panel of senior analysts. Crockett didn't arrive with the same energy she had during earlier public hearings. There were no prepared quips or bold accusations, just a stack of folders and the weight of public scrutiny hanging in the air. The director opened the session with a simple request: please account for the timeline. She laid out the purchases, the PAC contributions, and the travel, one by one, with no room left for interpretation. When it was Musk's turn to speak, he kept it short. "This isn't about me," he said. "This is about the American people who work hard, pay taxes, and expect their leaders to do the same, without shortcuts." Crockett pushed back, arguing that she had operated within legal bounds and had never accepted any improper gifts or bribes. "You're not a judge, you're not a senator, you're not even under oath," she told Musk. "No," he replied. "I'm just the reason people started asking questions." By the time the session ended, no one had reached a final verdict. But one thing had become clear. The story wasn't going away. In fact, it had only just begun. Later that week, the New York Post ran a front-page headline, "Zero PAC dollars? Here's $372,450 that says otherwise." The article broke down Crockett's contribution history, side by side with her public denials. It wasn't an opinion piece. It was a spreadsheet in story form. The facts, laid out for all to see. In the aftermath, staffers on Capitol Hill began quietly rechecking their own travel disclosures. More subpoenas were issued. DOGE's servers, flooded with new tips, logged their busiest week since the agency was formed. And through it all, Musk remained largely silent, offering no further comment beyond one line in an off-camera conversation with a journalist. "It's amazing," he said, "how fast the guilty go quiet when the data starts talking." It wasn't about personal attacks, it wasn't about party lines, it was about truth, accountability, and the uncomfortable questions that follow when public service starts looking more like private gain. As the DOGE investigation continues and additional findings are prepared, the broader conversation is changing. Voters are asking more. Citizens are paying closer attention. And officials are being reminded that public trust is not an unlimited currency. It's something that has to be earned and, more importantly, kept. Whether or not this leads to real consequences remains to be seen. But one thing is certain: the days of hiding behind vague filings, incomplete disclosures, and feel-good speeches are coming to an end. Because now someone is watching, and they've got the receipts.